Hello, this is Darrell Castle with today's Castle Report. This is Friday, 16th day of May in the year of our Lord 2025. I will be talking about President Trump's trip to the Middle East, which should be finishing just about as I record this report. The trip reflects Trump's vision of the world and how it can be more peaceful, prosperous for everyone. In other words, the anti-neocon view of the world. President Trump is currently on a presidential trip to several Middle East countries, including Saudi Arabia, his first stop, then several of the Gulf Arab states, including Qatar, or Qatar if you prefer, the second stop. While he was in Riyadh, he spoke to the new leader of Syria, which is interesting because until the fall of Assad, that man, the new leader of Syria, was listed as a wanted international terrorist. Apparently, Mr. Erdogan of Turkey joined in the conversation by phone and lobbied Trump to lift the sanctions on Syria, which Trump agreed to do. His reception by the Middle East countries has been phenomenal, met with similar joy as his election was met with by his supporters here in America. The joy is in reality hope, I think, just hope for what could be, what will be with the Trump presidency, they hope. When Air Force One entered Saudi airspace, 6 Saudi jet fighters came out, flew escort for his descent into Riyadh Airport. The Crown Prince, Mr. bin Salman, came out personally to greet the arrival of the President of the United States, something he publicly did not do when President Biden visited. A long purple carpet stretched from the airplane steps to the waiting limousines, while American music played from loudspeakers. The Saudis even rigged up a mobile McDonald's restaurant on the trailer of a large truck in reference to the President's legendary fondness for McDonald's cheeseburgers. Trump seems to have an affinity for Middle East people, especially their leaders, because he shares a few things in common with them. He doesn't drink, and he does not condemn their culture and their way of life. Let me pause here for a moment, give a little history to illustrate my point. First, we have George H.W. Bush, or George the Elder. His war to al-Saddam Hussein from Kuwait with its "this aggression will not stand" rhetoric. Then we have 8 years of Bill Clinton's no-fly zone over Iraq with its starvation of hundreds of thousands of people, allegedly. We then follow that with 8 years of George W. Bush's global war on terror with its invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. We follow that with 8 years of Barack Obama's Afghanistan, the good war, as opposed to Iraq, the bad war. Donald Trump comes in back in 2016, tries to extricate himself from Afghanistan, but Joe Biden finally does it, albeit with extreme cost. Joe Biden almost immediately becomes embroiled in a European war between Ukraine and Afghanistan, so it's basically been a 25-year struggle of war, of killing, dying, and total destruction of infrastructure. The leaders of the Middle East apparently see this man Trump with his prosperity instead of war rhetoric, and they like it. They're hopeful. His statements before the trip reflected the new attitude and purpose of the trip. He said he wanted to make new deals for peace and profit that went over especially well in the Saudi kingdom. Quote from the president, quote, "a land of peace, safety, harmony, opportunity, innovation, and achievement right here in the Middle East is within our grasp," end quote. That was apparently music to the ears of Mr. bin Salman. When you think about it, it's hard to find fault with that ambition. It's hard for me, anyway. Perhaps Trump's joyous reception is because his approach to foreign policy in general, the Middle East in particular, in contrast to all those presidents I just mentioned, his approach is not ideological. To illustrate, here's a quote from the president that was apparently well received by Saudi ears. Quote, "Too many American presidents have been afflicted with the notion that it is our job to look into the souls of foreign leaders and use U.S. policy to dispense justice for their sins," end quote. In closing, he said, quote, "I believe it is God's job to sit in judgment. My job is to defend America and to promote the fundamental interests of stability, prosperity, and peace," end quote. That view of American policy toward the Middle East is the exact opposite of how those former presidents I mentioned seemed to view their roles. The purpose of those wars, we were constantly told, was to democratize and liberalize those countries. They were always just a small handful of rogue states, just a handful of religious fanatic terrorists who actually seemed to believe the words in that book written 1,200 years ago. If the U.S. could just win its wars, they said, just win its wars, thus bringing regime change to those rogue states, the rest of the Middle East would be inspired to accept Western values, including its modern view of women, especially its view of homosexuals. Then the Middle East would become like Switzerland. Believe it or not, the entire Middle East resisted that approach, although some nations pretended not to because they thought cooperation with America was better than war with America. Other neocons supported the wars for different reasons, but essentially the wars were nonpartisan. So for 25 years, they've all been in it together, although for different reasons. For example, the classic neocon treatise, also nonpartisan, was The Project for a New American Century, which demanded that America not liberalize the Middle East, but subjugate and destroy it, so that this century, the century we are in right now, would be dominated by America as it ruled the world order, despite having different reasons then. Both liberals and conservatives supported the wars, including the necessity of killing and dying, and of course, the bombing of infrastructure into rubble. This is going to be quite a juggling act for the president over the next few months, next few years. One of the balls he has to juggle to achieve his vision of a peaceful and prosperous Middle East is Israel. I don't know how much history Donald Trump knows, especially the history portrayed to us in the Bible, but there are people in the Middle East who have literally hated each other for thousands of years. 1,000 years before the American Revolution, the people in that region hated and made war against each other. Before most of the region was divided into countries as it is today, they hated each other. Great Britain, as part of the treaty that ended World War I, divided that sand into lines they call countries. To some extent, that kept a damper on much of the tribal warfare until the State of Israel appeared in 1948. It's been either war by Israel against its enemies or war by the United States against the enemies of Israel ever since. Donald Trump comes into the picture with a completely different perspective. Trump seeks prosperity instead of war. Perhaps that explains at least part of the hatred of the neocons on both sides of the aisle against him. Is the U.S. Congress Israeli-occupied territory, as Fritz Hollins used to say it was? If so, then Trump will have a difficult time overcoming the voices united against him, but time will tell, folks. Worthy of note is that one Middle East country not on the president's agenda for this trip is Israel. Is that a not-so-subtle message? Well, seems that way to me. Word of warning to the president. The last president who had problems with Israel's expansionist goals was John Kennedy, as well as future candidate for president Robert Kennedy, his brother. The rest of them, JFK's successors, seem to have learned their lesson. They got the message, folks, loud and clear. Well, President Trump has survived 2 assassination attempts so far that we know of, one of which wounded him. He didn't miss a beat, so maybe that display of guts and bravado makes him more admirable to the macho people in the Middle East. It's pretty clear that he has not allowed hatred, threats, and intimidation by the media to sway him from his agenda. So he's left with some real head-scratcher problems if he is to accomplish anything on this visit besides commerce. Can he make peace while war rages on between Israel and Hamas, as well as Israel and the Houthis? Apparently, the Iranians, in anticipation of talks with Trump, told the proxies, the Houthis in Yemen, to stop attacking American assets. If you're looking to find peace with its accompanying prosperity, attacking American warships with the president in the region would be a very bad look, so back off, he told the Houthis. The Houthi restraint might be temporary, but it is on for now. That's better than nothing. Trump also seems to be a man who knows when to hold them and when to fold them, as they say, which is a very desirable trait in a president. Too many times the U.S. has started a war with no way out, so when he saw that developing in the Red Sea, he just declared victory and went home. The Israelis, on the other hand, continue the war against the Houthis, conducting daily bombing strikes all over Yemen. They continue to pound the rubble of Gaza, dropping thousands of tons of bombs into what appears to be rubble, worse than the pictures of some of the German cities after World War II. There are reports and pictures coming out of Gaza of starvation on a scale that defies all semblance of humanity. Are those reports true? Are they exaggerated or lies? I don't know the answer to that. But if they're true, it's hard to see how any civilized person could continue to be a party to it. Mass starvation of children, as Joe Biden would say. Come on, man. In conclusion, folks, I want to bring this Castle report to a conclusion with a quote from Dr. Ron Paul. Quote, having ignited the tinderbox of the region with U.S. backing, Israel has now found itself friendless in a region increasingly hostile to its policies, even its very existence. Now there are indications that the Trump administration is tiring of this entangling alliance as the MAGA base looks more warily on foreign interventionism. Ties by trade and friendship produce peace and prosperity and are far preferable to endless neocon war cries, end quote. Well, okay, finally, folks, the rumor is that Trump is encouraging the Saudis and the Gulf Arabs to formally recognize the state of Israel. In return, the United States would recognize Palestine as a separate country, a separate state, entitled to have an embassy and all the accompanying benefits of sovereignty. If that rumor is true, it explains why the neocons hate him so much. He works for peace rather than war. At least that's the way I see it. Till next time, folks, this is Darrell Castle. Thanks for listening.